So I'm figuring out how to fix it. So it might take me a day to get them uploaded again, but I will be posting the Teams meetings correctly, so you'll be able to watch them now. So back to the cycle. So step 3 is when our civilizations begin. When you have farming, are people moving around or are they staying in one location now? When people farm, do they keep moving around or do they stay in one location? Elliot, do you know? When people farm, do they move around or stay in one location?
Stay in one location.
Yeah, they stay in one location. So as they stay in one location, so it says their farming techniques become so advanced, villages and towns grow into large city-states, which is an early city that was like a small independent country with its own laws and government. So as they stay in one location, they start to form little towns, little villages. And as these towns and villages grow over the years, because they're all staying in one place now, so it'll grow over the years, because as farming continues, what happens? This one up here in the left-hand corner of the cycle, population increases, right? So if their population increases, then their cities get bigger too. So as their cities get bigger, they become little city-states. A city-state is like the size of a city, maybe a large city even, but it's city, but it's independent. It's like its own country. So you'll get like Roman and Greek cities that become city-states, and those are like the most popular ones people talk about usually. So characteristics of agricultural civilizations. Some of these are your like vocab words. So division of labor, that's a vocab word, which is also known as specialization. That's where people living in cities become experts at doing one specific job. So you get really good at doing one kind of job. Social classes, we talk about social hierarchy in our vocabulary, a social hierarchy, and that is comprised of different social classes. So with social classes, people began to be ranked based on the importance of their position in their city-states. So social classes are part of the social hierarchy. You have different classes at different levels. At the top, at the bottom, you have like usually poor people and slaves. Number 10 says writing systems. People in the upper class learn to record important religious and government work. So as a society, they need a way to record their history, right? And so a lot of the times back then, your history was your religious and government related work. So they developed writing systems to be able to record that information instead of just passing it by mouth. Laws were passed to keep order and punish anyone who threatened the city-state. So you start seeing laws. As society and civilizations grow, they come up with laws. That way their civilization can continue to grow in a productive manner. Religion, you also see religion develop to explain things that happened in nature. So religion develops as belief systems about things that are already occurring in nature. And public works, you see structures are being built to help the city-state function. So different buildings, different structures like bridges, aqueducts, anything like that really, canals, irrigation systems, yeah, so things like that will help the city-state function. All right, Results of agriculture. Results of agriculture. With the people, farming and agriculture caused people to change technologically, socially, and culturally too. They would be clearing land for farming, using animals to plow fields, irrigating fields, and using walls for protection. So all of these things can pretty much be seen over here in this graphic. Different ways that agriculture has affected people can be seen in this graphic. So, as agriculture develops, people change. So as agriculture develops, people change technologically, socially, and culturally. We talked on the last slide about some of these. How do people change culturally? That we talked about on the last slide. How do they change culturally? Their religion, they develop religions, right? Technically, they're developing writing systems. Socially, they're congregating into city-states. It's not just smaller areas anymore. They're becoming large city-states. So number 12 says, how does using animals to plow fields impact the amount of crops that can be grown? How does using animals to plow fields impact the amount of crops that can be grown? Does anybody have any idea how using animals would impact the amount of crops that can be grown? Would they be able to grow more or less crops? Nadia.
They would probably be able to grow more because the animals are able to plow fields faster.
Yes, they can grow more. They can plow fields faster. They can help with harvesting. So yeah, they're able to grow more crops. So the way they impact crops is they can grow more crops. So you could say something like, more crops can be grown as a result of using animals to plow fields. All right, did everybody get that one?
No.
No? So they can,
No.
they can grow more crops. That's what you need, more crops. Okay. So for number 13, you just write down what's in the box. So you write down what's in the box. So why did agriculture begin? People began farming and forming agriculture civilizations for two reasons. These two reasons are what you're going to write in the box. The two reasons that agriculture or farming, so the two reasons that farming began are there was a lack of resources due to increasing human population, so there was nowhere new for them to migrate. There was a lack of resources due to increasing human population with nowhere new for them to migrate. So that means that when they would go to move to their next location, that location wouldn't have food either, and neither would the others. So they had to start finding a way to stay and to farm their food. Another reason is that climate change occurred. So climate change occurred, causing the warming of the earth from the last ice age, which made it farming possible. So because of climate change, the warming of the earth from the last ice age made farming possible. I'll give you a second to finish copying this down, and then I'll move on to the next one in a minute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. So, effects of abandoning and hunting and gathering. So, effects of abandoning foraging, really, right? Because foraging is when they hunted and gathered. So, this is what happened because they quit hunting and gathering. People had more resources due to a warming climate, and this led to people settling down and staying in one area. And that's a sedentary lifestyle, right? We've gone over that. A sedentary lifestyle is when you stay in one area. Settling down in one area caused human populations to grow and increased the pace of collective learning. Who can remind me what collective learning is? Who can remind me? Aaron?
It's collective learning is when you pass information down to generation.
Yep. So collective learning was increased. It was at an increased pace from that point. As populations grew, humans needed more resources such as food, shelter, and water. So they invented ways to make their environment active. This is what we refer to as the farming techniques. This is what we've talked about with their farming techniques, the inventions that they made to make their environment more productive. So as the populations grow, they needed more resources, and that's why they had to come up with those farming techniques. So number 14 says, as populations and collective learning increase, early humans need more what? Who knows what they needed more of? they needed more, it says it on here in the fourth bulletin
Resources?
board. Yep, they needed more resources. So, as populations and collective learning increase, early humans need more resources. They need more resources. Okay, next slide. As populations grew and turned into cities, states, and empires, greater opportunities for collective learning evolved, but so did the types of challenges human communities had to face. Population growth, specialization of labor, and the emergence of rulers and social hierarchies all paved the way for increased collective learning. But they also created some complex problems and relationships that we are still struggling to resolve today. According to the paragraph, what new developments emerged in cities, states, and empires as populations grow? So it says, hint, these developments made cities and empires more complex. So what in this paragraph made cities, states, and empires more complex? Aaron.
It's either population growth or collective learning.
Yeah, I think honestly, if you wanted to, you could argue that both of those would work. So it says here, greater opportunities for collective learning evolved. So there were greater opportunities for collective learning, and because of collective learning, they created some complex problems and relationships that we are still struggling to resolve today. So collective learning would be a good one. But collective learning, increased collective learning happens because population growth, specialization of labor, and the emergence of rulers happens. So you could say that population growth, specialization of labor, and the emergence of rulers. And you can also say the greater opportunities for collective learning. So you can say the greater opportunities for collective learning emerged because of population growth, specialization of labor, and the emergence of rulers. Okay. The next slide is another one of those videos like we watched yesterday, and there are true and false questions for you to answer. So number 16 through 21 are true and false questions that will be answered in the video just like we did yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and start the video now, so make sure you're paying attention and answering the questions. Oh wait, I have to share the sound. 1 second. Make sure that you are watching the video and following along and answering the true and false questions as you listen to the video.
In the last unit, we crossed the 7th major threshold of complexity in this course, agriculture. We saw how, from about 10,000 years ago, small agricultural villages began to spread in many different parts of the world. These were, in fact, some of the most important human communities that have ever existed. Now, at first, that may seem surprising, because when we think of human history, we often think first of the great agrarian civilizations. We think of Rome and its empire, or we think of the great Han capital, Xi'an, and its empire. But without the slow spread of simple farming villages, those agrarian civilizations could never have existed. The real key to understanding agrarian civilizations is increasing complexity. Complexity seems to increase as populations increase. But to support larger populations, you need to be able to get more resources from a given area, particularly more food resources. And that's where farming comes in. Thanks to farming, between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, human populations seem to have increased from about 5 million to 10 times as much, about 50 million. A lot of those humans still lived as foragers, but probably by 5,000 years ago, the vast majority of them lived as peasant farmers. Now, within each agrarian area, villages began to bud off, both within the core regions and at their edges. So villages began to spread. And at the same time, farmers began to develop new and more productive ways of farming. They began to farm areas they couldn't farm before, they developed new crops, and they began to develop new and more productive technologies of farming. From about 6,000 years ago, some communities began to find more productive ways of using their domestic animals. Instead of just using them for their meat or skin, which you can only do when you slaughter them, they began to use them for products that they develop while they're still alive, such as their fur or their milk or their draft power. Now, that was a real energy revolution. A human can deliver perhaps 75 watts of power, but a horse or an ox can deliver almost 10 times as much. And using that power to pull plows, some communities began to farm lands that you couldn't possibly farm using just ordinary handheld hoes. And using that power, you could also carry goods in a way that was impossible just for human porters. And finally, these more productive ways of using animals made it possible for so-called pastoral nomads to settle the arid steppelands of Eurasia, traveling nomadically with their herds of livestock. But an even more productive innovation was irrigation. Irrigation is used to farm areas where there's not enough rainfall. If those areas have fertile soils, which a lot of them do, then you can get huge crops through irrigation, particularly if you introduce large-scale, sophisticated irrigation systems with canals and ditches that require a lot of organization. As farming technologies became more complex and more productive, they eventually allowed the creation of larger, more populous and more complex societies, the societies we call agrarian civilizations. This transition seems to have happened first in Mesopotamia, in the lands south of the Fertile Crescent, and also at about the same time along the Nile Valley. In these regions, as villages spread and farming became more productive, eventually there appeared the first really large villages and then towns and cities. In the lands between the great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, irrigation systems emerged that produced huge crops and supported large populations. And then from about 5,000 years ago, there appeared in the south of Mesopotamia, in the region called Sumer, the first real cities. These had populations up to 50,000 people. They had walled gardens, they had fortifications around them, they had temples, they had palaces, and they had complex irrigation systems. We even have a map of one of them, Nippur. That map was carved in clay about 3,500 years ago. These were the most complex human societies that had ever existed so far. The real key to the creation of cities seems to be the tiny surpluses that peasant farmers produced, particularly as their farming became more productive. What this meant was that it was no longer necessary for everyone to be a farmer. Specialists began to appear, potters and merchants and priests and soldiers. And now something happened that was a bit like something that had happened already 500 or 600 million years earlier with the appearance of the first multi-celled organisms. Individuals got so dependent on each other that they began to need some sort of coordinating mechanism. So potters, for example, needed markets to sell their goods on. Soldiers needed governments that could hire their services. Merchants needed courts to settle disputes. Town dwellers and farmers needed someone to maintain the huge irrigation systems on which they depended. And everyone, frankly, needed someone to organize all of these increasingly complex relationships.
Okay, we're going to pause there because your guys' class period is over, and we will finish it tomorrow. So you should have through number 20 answered so far, and we'll answer 21 tomorrow and watch the rest of the video, and then we'll go through the answers to those. So you have an exit ticket for today. Make sure that you do that, and that's it. Let me pull up really quick your exit ticket. If you want to stay on, if not, you can go. But I was just going to talk through the exit ticket. I think it was pretty simple today. Okay, it says, is farming necessary to sustain large populations? It is, right? We can't sustain 7 billion people without farming because we need that food surplus. And what does sustain mean? To keep people alive. So to sustain is to keep the civilization alive. Okay, bye. Have a nice day.